Hi everyone, welcome back to History Respawned. On today's episode, we will be covering not E3 2023. This is covering all of the history game announcements in late May, early June of 2023, a time period that used to be reserved for the big video game conference known as E3, but E3 is dead. Long live E3 in various forms. And joining me on this episode is my good friend and colleague, Dr. John Harney. John, how are you doing?
I'm good, Bob. How are you?
I'm very good. It feels good to be back. History Respawn. We've been on a hiatus. John, I kept getting messages, direct messages, references on Twitter, on YouTube, asking, when is the show coming back? Are you on hiatus? And I'd be like, no,
man.
we're not. We're not on hiatus. And then
Yeah.
here we are 5 months later.
Well, can I just say, I think, Bob, I'm sure you agree, we love you too, everyone. We do.
Yes,
We just,
definitely.
yeah, this spring became, we were just reflecting before we started recording.
Yeah.
Whoa,
Yeah.
it's June somehow.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
June somehow. And
Yeah.
I had the best of intentions to come back in March and then in April and then in May. But here we are, better
Here
late
we
than
are.
never. So
That's right.
those of you who are new, welcome. And those of you who've stuck with us, thank you. Thank you very, very much. This show would not exist without you and your support. And we are going to go run through, in reverse order, the conferences that we've had recently from the video game world. And we're not going to maybe talk in depth about all the games that made a debut at these conferences, but we are going to talk about the ones that touch upon historical topics and historical themes. And so the shows that we have had recently in reverse order, Ubisoft Forward, we have had the Xbox Game Showcase, we have had the Summer Game Fest, and we have had the PlayStation Showcase. And in addition to those big conferences, we're also going to run down a list of recent history game announcements that were not promoted at one of these big shows. And, you know, John, it's really weird having the end of E3, right? E3 attempted to come back this year, but eventually they decided, because none of the major publishers were on board, that they would just cancel this year's show. And so now, instead of having one big show to talk about, we have a run back of the summer of 2020 where we have a bunch of little shows. And I guess that's just going to be the world going forward. It feels very, very odd.
Yeah, it almost feels to me like I was going to make the joke. It's like, wouldn't it be great if we'd had this one event where they could all go to and share the videos together? And I guess it's been long enough now, Bob. I mean, it's not just a COVID interruption. Like E3 was struggling, I think, back to 15 years ago, where the bigger publishers were always inching towards doing their own thing. Like Nintendo basically always ignored E3
and
for
then
the most part, I
PlayStation
think.
did the same thing. Yeah.
Right, and like I think back to back when GameSpot was Shoemaker and Gersman and all those guys who are now off doing all these different things. When they all did GameSpot, that was 20 years ago, I guess, and they would do these live shows from E3. Like it made sense in that context, but it was also an era of booth babes. I don't know if not everyone listening might
Gross.
know what those are,
Yeah.
but they are what they sound like, basically. And so, and I don't know. I wonder what. I mean, obviously, you and I are both evidence that there's lots of video game fans who aren't like 23 or 18 or whatever.
Speak
But I
for
wonder what
yourself.
our
Speak for yourself,
yeah.
John.
I don't know. I wonder like if you're younger or whatever, and you're just video game news and everything is a larger part of your diet even than it is for us. I wonder
Yeah.
what people like that prefer. I could see them preferring. This week is PlayStation Week, awesome. And next week
Yeah.
is Xbox Week, and you just get to. It's an ongoing month of fun. Maybe that's what it's like. I don't
Maybe
know.
that's better. I don't know. I just think of E3 growing up, reading about it in games magazines, thinking about trying to go. I mean, it was the Super Bowl of video
Yeah.
games, and now it doesn't exist anymore, and that feels very, very odd. But it may be for the better. Certainly for younger generations, I think they probably prefer it this way. Okay, well, let's start by talking about Ubisoft Forward. And Ubisoft, if you're not aware, is the developer of Assassin's Creed. And boy, did they have a lot of Assassin's Creed news at this conference. And so the games that they discussed during this press event included Assassin's Creed Mirage, Assassin's Creed Nexus, Assassin's Creed Codename Jade, as well as Skull and Bones, long in development, long in development, maybe even older than E3 at this point. I'm not sure. But let's
Oh God.
start by talking about Assassin's Creed Mirage. And so this is the follow-up to Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is the next mainline Assassin's Creed game, and it is a prequel to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, following the character Basim from Assassin's Creed Valhalla, as he is an assassin in 9th century Baghdad. And this game launches on October 12th, so kind of right around the corner, honestly. And in the press event, they touted this game as a, quote, back to basics Assassin's Creed game, a celebration of the original Assassin's Creed, which came out some 15 years ago. And I'm really excited about this game because in the press releases and in the coverage that came out from various video game websites that had a chance to go and see demos of this game, many of them talked in depth about how this game is a callback to Assassin's Creed 1, the stealth focus of that series, and in the words of at least IGN, quote, combat in this game is a backup solution. So meaning that the focus is going to be on stealth and a shorter game experience. We're skipping the 60 to 70 hour RPG open world, and instead we are going back to a much shorter, less than 20-hour focused experience. John, what do you think of what they showed?
I feel the same way. They're speaking my language, as it were, particularly the shorter game time. I think the gameplay trailer in particular is just so helpful to really demonstrate what they're talking about. And my two big reactions are, I guess you get to be Batman in this game with the kind of the investigation type stuff. But it really does. I mean, famously, the first game, I'm assuming a lot of people listening have played it, but maybe not everybody because it is an older game now. Famously, the first game is really interesting and cool and fascinating, and then you randomly have to do the shitty combat for the last 30 minutes.
Yep.
And the combat was never developed and it was bad. And so it's just really interesting. This game is like an embrace of that. We did it really well for 90% of that first game we made. I'm intrigued there's this step away from the mammoth games they produced the last 4 to 5 years. But it all looks good, and the cinematic trailer is really fun as well. It's hard for you to know. We'll talk about this again when it comes to Codename Jade because I have some thoughts about that. But um, I don't know. I'm not from the Middle East and stuff, and it's not my area as an historian, so I don't want to rush into like positive judgments or stuff. But it's a trailer it's this city that's alive, and you're parkouring around it, and yes, it is Baghdad, but it doesn't feel like, I have a colleague here who, during his job talk, he dissected the opening scenes to Disney's Aladdin from the early 90s,
Oh,
which
interesting.
is this song about, the desert is hot and there's all these weird quasi-sexual references in a children's movie, because it's the Orient. And that the trailer doesn't feel that way to me for this game. It just feels, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Like you can see this development they've made as a studio in terms of like we're embracing settings and things like
Yeah.
that. And it reminded me that Assassin's Creed has always been pretty cool with the choice. They've rarely made quote unquote obvious historical choices.
Yes.
Even when they've done it, it's felt meta,
Hmm.
like talking to George Washington and French Revolution. Those two games almost feel like off kilter despite the fact they're theoretically the obvious periods you would go
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'm excited. I'm excited. It makes me excited about the ongoing viability of Assassin's Creed as a whole, actually, that they're
Yes.
doing.
Yes, and I think even the most gung ho Assassin's Creed fan of the most recent open world RPG games, I think they would kind of admit maybe it's time to take a little bit of a break, right? Just
Yeah.
let's slow down a little bit. Let's have a more focused experience. And I liked your phrase there of being Batman because this game apparently emphasizes investigation and kind of doing reconnaissance on your target before you actually try to commit to the assassination, which was part of Assassin's Creed 1, but is really hammered home in this game where, in the demo that some game press got to play, they said that there is no longer a quest section, but instead that section is retitled Investigations, right? So
Hmm.
you're investigating. So you're a detective. So it's kind of like a Batman-esque situation,
Yeah.
just ending with, instead of Batman beating somebody up and throwing them in prison, instead you're assassinating them with a secret blade. So slight difference. But I was really excited by what I saw, really excited by the setting. And I'm really excited not to have to play a 50 to 70 hour RPG Assassin's Creed game. I still have not finished Valhalla. I was about 30, 40 hours in, and I just never got back to it. It was too daunting, too much for me.
I'm in a trap with Valhalla where I've I've got the complete edition because I particularly want to go to the Irish DLC, but I'm a weirdo and I won't just skip to the DLC.
Yeah, same.
Or you know what I mean? Like
Same.
I want to play the game. I want to play the
Yeah.
game they made. But the problem I have is that right now it's called Diablo 4, but there's always something else I'm doing. Sometimes it's my family, but there's always something else I'm doing.
Well,
And
your
I
son's
just,
name is Diablo, right? So there you go.
well, there you go. So yeah, that I feel relieved. And then I enjoyed the cinematic trailer as well. God forgive me, I can never remember her name. The actress, she's in The Expanse as the president, one of the best characters.
Yeah. What is her name?
She's a wonderful actor, wonderful voice
yeah.
actor as well. And I'm sorry everybody that I've forgotten her name. She's wonderful. But they wisely kind of make her very important in the cinematic trailer. And it does, yes, it's been done a million times, but it's like this is a street urchin who becomes an assassin. And the trailer they've made conveys that really well. Whereas early in the trailer, he's kind of trying to parkour away, but they're kicking his ass. Then at the end of the trailer, he's the guy. And I don't know, all the vibes are good from that game, which is really exciting.
Shorey Aghdashloo. And
Thank you
I'm
very
sure
much.
I'm butchering that pronunciation, but she is amazing. I remember
Yes.
her on 24 as well. But
Oh,
The
that's
Expanse,
right, yeah.
but just
And
amazing.
just the best voice.
An
I mean, she's a
iconic,
wonderful actor as
iconic
well, but
voice.
the best
Yeah,
voice.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, everything. Mirage is really exciting to me, and it's a mixture of deliberately not finding stuff out, but also just having kids and being busy at work and all the things that kept us away from the podcast for however many months it was.
Yes.
So that I knew so little about Mirage except that it was going to exist, and I'm delighted I'm this excited about it, actually.
I'm too.
I'm really happy to say I'm excited.
I am too. And it's particularly great because we just have so long with these RPGs. It's nice to see them kind of going back to basics, and I hope I hope it's good. I mean, I hope it's good.
And people who played the very first game, will remember, and I can't remember how long this went on for. I guess a couple of games. And it sounds like they've really deepened this layer to it, which is great. But I remember that in the first game, really kind of, kind of stalking around the perimeter of a building, trying to figure out how I'm going to get in and get this guy.
Yeah.
Kind of a little bit of a Hitman-esque kind of vibe
It's very
to it.
deliberate. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And the pace then, as a result, is slowed down, but in a very good way. So I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, and then the next Assassin's Creed game that made a debut with a new trailer was Assassin's Creed Nexus. And so this game is very interesting. This is a partnership between Ubisoft and Meta, makers of the MetaQuest 2, formerly Facebook, the Zuckerberg glasses, if you might call them that. But this is a VR game that is going to star various heroes from past Assassin's Creed games, including Ezio from Assassin's Creed 2, Cassandra from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and then from Assassin's Creed 3, we've got Connor, the protagonist of Assassin's Creed 3. And so this game, it's a VR game, and that means it's a first-person game, and it is going to include jumping, parkour, and diving off of buildings. And so, John, what was your reaction to this, and what do you think about trying to transplant Assassin's Creed, a third-person game, with all of this parkour and jumping around, trying to transplant into a headset? What do you think of that?
I don't know. I mean, Apple is releasing its $3,500 headset that I guess it doesn't really plan to sell to anybody, and Zuckerberg
Well, I mean,
made
except
this.
to Center College and Dr. John
Well,
Hardy.
No, I
Purposeful
think
request.
that is a bridge too far.
That's coming, John. John, that's
No.
coming. That's
But
coming.
well, it is funny in education, as you know, Bob. every year or two, someone's like, let's get some VR headsets and build,
Yep.
a
Uh-huh.
castle or a plantation. It's like, sure, sure. Can you give me 5 years of support and, students to do that? Oh, we can't do that. But anyway, but Zuckerberg was like, oh, you're on your own in that video, and that's not what we have vision at all. And then in this video for Nexus, or at least one of the videos for Nexus, what else can you show, right? They show this guy in a headset in his living room, and I'm just sitting there going, I would feel stupid if the building was empty. I would feel stupid doing. That's how I feel when I play now. Then
No.
the other side of it, like, so there's a game I really want to enjoy, in VR, which I've enjoyed a lot of on a regular computer, which is No Man's Sky,
Mm.
and I've just never. I can't get that game to feel right to me when I play it in VR. I just
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
So beyond that, that's the extent of what I can say about. So again, I'd love to be wrong. I'm just skeptical about the parkour thing. Then the other part of it is where Mirage is so encouraging. There's such a cohesive, clear vision of what they want to
Yes.
do and what they're
Yes.
doing. And everything about Nexus is like, oh, we've partnered with Meta and we've got characters in all these different games, and it's like, okay, so what is the game trying to do?
Yeah.
A lot of VR games have that problem, I think.
Yeah. I think you're totally right. And, this has been an issue for VR, but particularly for the Quest line, Oculus Rift before that. And, the problem is that Meta, well, they used to have a lot of money. And so what they did in order to encourage development is they brought in these AAA studios and just threw them a bunch of money. And you saw this with EA,
Yeah.
you saw this with all sorts of studios, and now with Ubisoft. And so basically, Meta is paying them a whole bunch of money. I'm sure it's an outrageous sum of money to make this game so that they can try to use it to sell headsets. And in my experience, those games tend to be among the worst,
Mm.
Meta Quest
Yeah,
games.
yeah.
And I'm speaking from some experience. I own a Meta Quest 2. Assassin's Creed Nexus will be on the Meta Quest 2. I'm sure the Meta Quest 3 was just announced. I'm sure it'll be on that as well.
Yeah,
But
it
in
is
my
confirmed for that.
Yeah, but in my
Yeah.
time, the best VR games that I've played, one of which is Half-Life Alyx, for
hmm
which comes from Steam, and so I have to plug my headset into the computer, or I can use virtual
Right.
desktop, but it's not a native MetaQuest game. And then Super Hot VR, which I don't
hmm
know the story of development for that, but that's not one of these games where Meta gave them a whole ton of money to
Right.
develop it. And in those games, they work well because they don't ask you to do a lot of jumping and parkour and diving,
hmm
right? Those are types of games that it works well with first person because you can kind of use the teleport system. And a lot of VR
hmm
games are like this, where in order to get
hmm
over moving in VR and kind of the swimmy feel in VR with the
hmm
headset on, they use teleporting so you can just zoom immediately to the next spot. And I
Right.
just wonder if you're using teleporting, that makes sense because you avoid kind of the inertia, the kind of weird, gross feeling of trying to move in VR. But does that really mean it's Assassin's Creed? Because I think of Assassin's
hmm
Creed and it's parkour, it's jumping, and it's diving off buildings, leaps of
Yeah.
faith. I don't know how that's gonna work. I'm just not sure. I'm excited that it includes older characters. And certainly the videos that they showed, I mean, the quality of the game looks pretty good, the quality of the
Right.
visuals, but I don't know. Is it still Assassin's Creed if it's in first person virtual reality? I'm not sure. Not
I think
convinced.
I I think part of VR's problem more broadly is people who are paid, or people whose job it is to make this a thing, aren't aren't really sure what it is, and I have sympathy for them in that regard, because I think there's people out there going, it's just $500 for a good headset, and it's like, well, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
I think you're, I don't, you're in a different tier to the rest of us. That's part of the issue, and then so this model that Meta is doing, of like, I'm going to throw money at this problem and stuff will happen. That's what Apple is doing with Apple TV.
Yeah.
And with Apple TV, if Silo is good and Ted Lasso was a pleasant surprise and yada, 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 and they don't care if there's a couple of lemons here and there, but also because it's TV, the lemons might be totally watchable. They might,
Hmm.
like, if the production's good and the writing was remotely decent and the performances are good, even if it isn't a big hit for them, it's not like embarrassing or anything like that. Whereas in the VR game space, then I don't know, like there was a period, it's over now, where Facebook really wanted to sell me on, hey, this is a baseball swinging trainer that uses our headset, and that's kind of almost, and if that is, I don't, my son doesn't play baseball, so I don't know, but if that software makes sense and is useful for people, then from the business side of it, of course, you want to sell that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the games seem to be getting lost somewhere in the middle of all of that, which
Hmm.
is what is it you guys want VR to be? So like I repeatedly read people, tech guys who say VR is kind of exciting when it replaces like your office, which is useful in very specific contexts, and that's just not what a game
For
audience cares
enterprise
about.
level executives,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That
exactly. Yes,
that's
exactly.
who's going to be the market for those Apple headsets, and then also John
Right.
Harney at Center College.
Well, yeah, of course, yeah.
Real
Right
quick,
into the CTL right now.
yeah, real quick. Have you
Yeah.
watched Silo yet? The Apple TV show.
I haven't. I would really like to. It's
I
kind of
would
on.
really
We
like
we
to
just
as well.
finished Succession, so I've got it
Oh,
lined up to
oh,
watch it.
nice.
Yeah,
Okay, I just finished. We'll
yeah.
talk after the show a little bit about
We'll talk
Succession.
after the show. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next game, last Assassin's Creed game that was shown at Ubisoft Forward was Assassin's Creed Codename Jade, which is not an awkward title at all. And it is Assassin's Creed mobile game, and it is free to
Mm,
play. And in this game, the setting is 3rd century BC China, which
hmm
maybe John Hardy can talk a little bit about. But the big attraction here, like a lot of mobile games, is that it's free to play, but also you make your own assassin. And this includes different skins, different kind of wardrobe choices, and of course a lot of microtransactions, as you would expect with a mobile
hmm
game. So, John, what did you make of this?
I agree. I think it looks great. I mean, I think we're into such an interesting space with mobile games now, whereas like modern phones and tablets and stuff can make a game can run a game that looks comparable to what your PC can do. I mean, especially indie games like I pay for Netflix, and so Netflix has games that you can just play as part of your membership, including Into the Breach, which is awesome, and you play it on your iPad, and it's like, oh, this is actually better playing on my computer. So the problem I guess they have is the control scheme. It looks great. They focus on terracotta warriors. So the Qin dynasty was around for 15 years at the very end of the 3rd century BC, and the Qin emperor, so he's the guy who built the terracotta warriors and had lots of people, lots of his servants were buried alive when he died to serve him in the afterlife, which was a thing that had been happening in Chinese society for a long time before that. And traditionally, he had often been cast as a tyrant. He was one of these emperors who took a lot of scholars, like people like you and me, Bob, and threw them into a pit and killed them. Again, not necessarily exceptional in the history of
Tough break. Yeah,
emperors globally.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he wasn't, fake news basically. So he put them in a he put them in a pit and killed them. Um, but especially in the last 20 years in particular, the current Chinese government really likes to emphasize how successfully he centralized the country and brought stability
Mm.
and order without necessarily opening things up to chaos and disorder, like,
That sounds like a
elections.
very attractive narrative for the current Chinese government.
Yeah. So, and then, the video, the trailer really, yeah. So it really relies heavily on this concept of what is your legacy? What is your legacy? And it's really interesting because it kind of plays into some conservative with a small c stereotypes the rest of the world has about China, but also plays into a kind of a, like you just said, a very convenient narrative that some in China have about China themselves. And it ends up being kind of like, oh, really? This is what we're doing? We're going to run around 2000 years ago and talk about the importance of your ancestors and your family honor and all that shit. And just
Hmm.
pardon my French, everybody, but listen, it was a minute long trailer. I mean, there's a lot that does look exciting. When you have a game like that where you pick your own assassin and you can do all these different things, there's so many ways they can choose to take that.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying I'm against it, but the uh the trailer was a bummer for those kinds of conservative, and I want to emphasize in the historiographical sense,
Hmm.
reading of this is what China is like. Well, that's deeply uninteresting. And you know what I mean? It's
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh
Of
yes,
course.
a land of ancestors, and oh, for God's sake, I don't know. That was disappointing to me, but we'll see. I mean,
Yeah,
we'll see. That was just the very first look we got at it.
yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I don't mind Diablo Immortal. I haven't played it in a long time, but I don't mind it.
Hmm.
But people hate it. People hated that game.
Yeah,
So like all mobile games, a lot's gonna depend on what it actually
Yeah.
what they do with it, you
I mean,
know?
yeah, it makes sense. I think the setting is very smart by Ubisoft, thinking about mobile game market, but then also particularly the market in Asia, where
Yeah,
this would be very
totally.
attractive, and they're much more common to have mobile technology rather than to have a console.
Yes,
And then
totally.
also, kind of think about younger players and creating avatars. And, this is all of Fortnite's business, basically. Basically every free to play game you can think of is
That's
around
right.
creating your own character,
Hmm.
buying new skins, which still is a phrase that bothers me a lot, but it's common nomenclature for those types of games. So this is a very smart business move for Ubisoft. Not that I really care about their business, but you can see why
Yeah, totally.
they've done things the way they have. And I think there's some potential here, and certainly potential for covering this for History Respawned, if for no other reason than to kind of bring up the points that you just did in more detail once we've got a
Yeah,
better read on
totally.
what the game is. And so this is a game that is going into beta, open beta later this month, later this June. So it's really soon, really exciting to
Wow.
have some new opportunities to play some new Assassin's Creed here very shortly. And then rounding things off, sorry, I just keep laughing every time I read this. Rounding things off for the Ubisoft Forward in terms of historical games, we have gotten a new update about Skull and Bones, a game which has been in development for nearly
Oh my
10
goodness.
years. That was using the naval ship technology from Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, which again came out about 10 years ago, 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. That game is going into closed beta this summer, later in August. I think the weekend of my birthday, August 27th. So maybe I'll contact Ubisoft and see if I can get into that closed beta just to kind of finally see what this game in development hell is like. But again, the setting for that one, kind of 18th century, and I think it's Indian Ocean is the focus. So it's not Pirates of the
Yeah.
Caribbean, but it's kind of a new setting, at least in terms for games, new setting for piracy. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm not sure, but I'll be curious to see what comes out of that. And then
File it. Yeah.
any thoughts on Skull and Bones, real fast, or
Yeah, just file it under. We'd love it if it was good. Wouldn't
yeah,
that be great?
yeah,
That's all. Like, yeah.
yeah. Then, real briefly, other games that were announced by Ubisoft here include Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, and this is going to be a 2D
Hmm.
Metroidvania. And in parentheses on our running list, our running agenda here, I've kind of connected these new games, with past Ubisoft products
Hmm.
because you can
Hmm.
see the clear influence on them. So Prince of Persia, this is a 2D Metroidvania that's very much in the style of the Assassin's Creed side-scrolling games. There was 3 of those that came out last decade. And then we have Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which is a game that looks exactly like any recent Far Cry you've played. Then lastly, and probably most excitingly, Star Wars Outlaws, which is an
Hmm.
open world RPG in the style of the humongous Assassin's Creed RPGs that have come out in the last 5 years or so. So, any thoughts on any of those, John?
Yeah, I mean, well, for really quick, Star Wars Outlaws to me, it's in the Outer Rim and everything, and I've gotten to the point where when it comes to Star Wars, I have two ends of a spectrum. One end is the Phantom Menace, that's the bad end, and the other end is Andor, which is is my
Mm-hmm.
new high point, and this is much more towards Andor, and it's kind of interesting. The Prince of Persia game, I've written down beside it. I'm sorry, listeners, for making this the old man podcast these days. I've written Xbox Live Arcade. Do you remember that?
Yes, of
That is
course.
an Xbox Live
Yes,
Arcade feeling game, and I
yes,
mean that as a compliment. The Prince Persia game was cool, actually. I think that could be really good.
yeah,
Avatar, I don't know,
yeah,
shrug emoji.
yeah.
Star Wars Outlaws looks good, and open question actually if we would end up covering that. I mean, I could totally see it because I mentioned Andor because yeah, I mean, there's so much room in Star Wars to talk about, and we'll talk about this with a couple of games in the second half of the episode. Uh, Context of Revolution,
Mm-hmm.
social movements, all that kind of stuff. I wonder how much that game will get into that kind of. It seems like it wants to get into that business. I just wonder how much it will.
Yeah, we'll see. I've got some,
Yeah.
as a historian of empire and revolutions, I have complicated feelings about Andor and what they're doing in that show. So maybe
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
after the episode we can
That's
talk a
right.
little bit about that. But
Would be like these YouTubers that have their actual YouTube, like their woodworking YouTube channel, and then the personal. So we'll do a second podcast.
well, yeah, sure, yeah.
No,
Well,
we're not.
with
We'll
whose
just have the
time? Yeah.
conversation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, let's move on.
Oh,
That's the end of Ubisoft. And so, continuing in our reverse order, let's see, about a week and a half ago, we had the Xbox Game Showcase. And this included a set of historically themed games that were either developed by Xbox or were in partnership with Xbox, but will probably appear on other platforms. So the first one of these is a game called Clockwork Revolution, which is a first-person RPG that has time travel elements, and the immediate reaction of the video game world to this game is this BioShock Infinite 2?
yeah.
Because this game, its art style is turn of the century, very inspired by kind of steampunk fiction, Art Nouveau all over the place. And then also the characters and some of the powers that are included in this game very
Mm.
much evoke almost copy and paste fashion BioShock Infinite. So, John, what did you make of this debut?
Oh, I've written beside it very excite. I wrote, and also Bioshock. I'm very excited about it. It's very much my jam. I think Bioshock Infinite was that game had its limitations, but I also thought that game was super interesting in a way that a lot of games weren't at that particular point. And what he was trying to do tonally, a lot more of it came off than you would have expected. And as an historian, it had some really interesting ideas about how to interpret our history and things like that. So all of that excited me. I also get some interesting vibes. Do you remember the game Sir, You Are Being Hunted,
Yes. Yeah.
Bob? Yeah, these kind of, posh Victorian robots are hunting you to kill you. And it has a little bit of that in there too, of this kind of, if they can get that right, of this kind of late 19th century genteel murder robot vibe, that could be a lot of fun. Um, so yeah, I'm excited about that game. I think it looks cool and interesting, and we'll talk about Lamplighters League in a few minutes as well. Um, uh, I don't know, this idea of social movements revolutions comes up again.
Yeah.
I think that Clockwork Revolution intrigues me. In the trailer, if people haven't seen it, you should totally go watch the trailer. They talk about all it takes is one cog out of alignment, etc. And you're the cog, and I'm like, yeah, this seems to me like a good mixture of the classic video game hero fantasy with social disorder type
Yeah.
stuff.
And I think, and BioShock Infinite does this quite a bit too, and Victoria 3 recently from Paradox does
Hmm.
this quite a bit, and it kind of tackles one of these big questions of the 19th century, late 19th century, which is how does industrialization influence the social order? And so you've got this era that's dominated by traditional hierarchies, aristocracy, sometimes very feudalistic orders, but now being met with the industrial era, social movements, Marxism, classical liberalism. And so, how does that, relate to the order of the land, right? How does that relate
Hmm.
to, the franchise, and who belongs to the voting groups? And so, a lot of that, it kind of harkens back to BioShock Infinite and some of these other steampunk games, but a lot of that does come out of legitimate historical questions and concerns that get addressed either at the end of the 19th century or the very beginning of
Hmm.
the 20th century. So a lot of grist for the History Respawn mill, I think, with that game, potentially. Let's go
I
ahead and...
al
Oh, go ahead.
oh.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, sorry, I'm sorry. Very quickly as well, another thing I think maybe I'm being too kind. I don't think I am, of course, but from the trailer for Clockwork Revolution, there's this kind of um there's a privileged class very obviously in this game world, and I don't know, I think that game makers are getting a more sophisticated understanding of what privilege looks like in, for example, the late 19th century than we had even when Bioshock Infinite was made. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's this scene of this character, he's effectively on a kind of a palanquin type thing of these robots moving him along on a little walking thing. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, you're actually I really feel you're getting it now. This is how certain classes were successfully elevating themselves above others.
Well, and
That's the kind of,
yeah.
yeah.
And, speaking just from my own American perspective, one of the questions I often have for my students is, are we in a new Gilded Age? Right? Is
Hmm.
this the next
Yep.
Gilded Age? Are we in it right now? And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of that perspective, I think, that might be driving some of this game development in terms of narrative, right?
Hmm.
Why are we all
Totally.
of a sudden so fascinated with the late 19th century? Oh, income inequality, desperate struggles over the social order, who controls the
Yeah.
narrative. It's like
It's
Benedict
all there.
Anderson all there all over again. All right, well, let's go ahead and transition to Lamplighter's
Sure.
League. I had this third on the list, but let's move it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the other big game trailer, historical games trailer that debuted was from Paradox, who are the publishers of a new game called Lamplighter's League. And I think we might have touched on this a little bit in the fall
Hmm.
for History Respawn. But
Yeah.
in case you're not familiar, listener, this is a real-time strategy game with tactical turn-based combat. And so if you go online and watch the debut trailer, gameplay trailer, you're going to immediately look at this and say XCOM, right? It's very
Hmm.
much kind of an XCOM game with kind of some real-time strategy elements in the overworld outside of combat. And this is a game that's set in kind of an alternative history version of the 1930s. Another popular topic for upcoming games is the interwar period. I wonder why. We've got kind of action adventure feel that evokes Indiana Jones, Sky Captain, The World of Tomorrow, Buck Rogers, and then Flash Gordon, my personal favorite. So, John, what did you make of what we saw new from
Hmm.
Lamplighters League?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about this game, and I think it looks good. Um, it's weird in my brain, and it's just even though it's a very different game, the kind of genre and the theoretical time period has me think of Empire of Sin, that Romero game
Mm-hmm.
that I really wanted to be good, and then I'd never really quite got into that game, which I wanted to. I get a big League of Extraordinary Gentlemen vibe out of
Oh,
it. Do you
that too.
remember that
Yes, of
that old
course.
movie? And yeah,
Yeah.
and
Sean Connery's last film, actually.
Chuck, yes, right. He went out. He died as he lived, making no, he didn't. He made much better movies than that. But and then I never read the books of that. But I don't know. I love this. It's got that Avengers type. It seems to me. Let's get the band together, but also it's quirky and weird.
Hmm.
And I don't know. It looks really promising and exciting. And then also you mentioned Flash Gordon and stuff. This is an area actually, Bob, where I'd love to hear what you think, because if they successfully channel that kind of interwar kitschy comic strip, but kind of for men, or Indiana Jones as well, right? That was Spielberg's attempt to recreate the
Right.
stuff he loved as a kid. If it can tap into that in an interesting way, that could be really fun.
Yes. And,
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I've noticed is that we've had this general turn in games, historical games in particular, where we've become more interested in the interwar period, which I think kind of reflects some of what we talked about with Clockwork Revolution. It's like, why are
Hmm.
developers more interested in late 19th century politics? So it's like, well, maybe we're living through it. And then with regards to the interwar period, why are we having developers create more games, like Inkle Studios Overboard? Why are we having more games set in this time period? I think it has a lot to do with kind of current political crises around the
Hmm.
world and concerns about fascism in particular, and kind of seeing a lot of similarities to the world of the 1920s, 1930s. And so, I'm very excited about this game, not only as a player, because I really like XCOM, and I would love to see.
Hmm.
It's not directly developed by Paradox, but it's published by Paradox, so I'd like to kind of see
Hmm.
their version of kind of XCOM combat. And then also, as a historian, really interested to see a new take on the kind of kitschy, pulpy
Hmm.
1930s, look at society. And yeah, I'm excited. So it says it's coming on October 3rd. Clockwork Revolution, by the way, doesn't have a release date yet. I would imagine maybe sometime next year. But Lamplighter's League is coming out this year, and it is going to be a Game Pass Day 1 game. So if you've got Xbox Game Pass, then you'll get that game first day it comes out. So I've got a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm for that game. Real quickly, in brief, some of the other games mentioned at the Xbox Games Showcase included a new DLC for Cyberpunk 2077. This is a game that John very adeptly covered for History Respawned. And so Cyberpunk 2077 has got a new DLC called Phantom Liberty, and this looks like a really big size portion of DLC with a major narrative that is going to star not just Keanu Reeves, but then also Idris Elba. So pretty excited about that. We also had the debut trailer for the new Fable game. This time, outside of the reach of Peter Molyneux, but kind of evoking the same kind of Lion's Head versions of Fable from back in the early 2000s. And then lastly, but definitely not least, is Starfield, which is Bethesda's new open world RPG in the style of the Elder Scrolls game Skyrim, but then also Fallout. And that game is coming to us September 6th, and that is a spacefaring hard sci-fi open world game where you get to build your own spaceship, and that sounds pretty dope to me. John, any thoughts about any of those remaining games?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Cyberpunk 2077 was a game that frustrated but also promised. I don't know. I enjoyed a lot of time with that game, but was annoyed by it and
Yes.
couldn't finish it because it just bugged and I couldn't finish the game, which was kind of part of the problem the game had. That's exciting. Starfield, I'll just say I'm excited and I'm hopeful, and let's just see. Fable looked like a lot of fun. I love the tone. There's a trailer out there with Richard Ayoade, who is this English comic actor who's really good.
IT Crowd, yeah.
IT Crowd was his big thing, and he's very funny. And there's a trailer where he is the central role of the trailer, and I just love the tone of the trailer as the hero is traveling through this community, and everyone's just is so tired of her bullshit. That's just such a, and it fits that kind of British, humor, a certain British kind of humor that the original Fable games had, because of course Molyneux's British. So, and I would love now. Again, I feel like an old man because the first Fable is like a 20-year-old game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it came out 2003, 2002 on the
so.
on the original, the OG
The original
Xbox.
Yeah. And I had so much fun with the first Fable game, and I would love a good Fable.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
It looks like fun.
Yeah.
And we would definitely, I think, cover it and maybe get somebody in for sure to talk to us about the things it's playing with.
Yeah, and maybe somebody who's an expert on British humor. I think that would kind of fit.
Yeah.
And maybe even talk a little bit about the older games, because it's got that very kind of British humor kind of bent to it. Okay, well, let's move on to talk about Summer Games Fest, which didn't include any trailers for any history-focused games. I think there was maybe a trailer for Assassin's Creed in there. But this event did have a few games that were maybe of interest, primarily to the oldies in our audience, including our two hosts here. This included John Carpenter's Toxic Commando, which looks like a Left 4 Dead style co-op game where you're fighting zombies, some sort of mutants. John Carpenter being one of the great American genre directors, film directors of the late 20th century, maybe the entire 20th century. Let's go ahead and crown him.
Let's give him that.
He's a king. We've also got a detailed look at Alan Wake 2, which was another kind of original Xbox, or I should say Xbox 360 production from Remedy. And this is Remedy's follow-up game to Control, which came out about 4 or 5 years ago. So interest in that. Then also we had a trailer for the live-action Twisted Metal TV show, which looks fascinating, starring Anthony Mackie, who you might know as the new Captain America for the MCU. He will be starring in this Twisted Metal TV show that is going to come out later this year. So we'll see. Twisted Metal, one of my favorite game series, at least from the original PlayStation. I'm dating myself really terribly there. But I always felt, as a young teenager, I always felt that that game would make for a great TV series. And now I get to see if that actually happens. So, John, any
Yeah.
thoughts about Toxic Commando, Alan Wake, or Twisted Metal?
Just to say, yeah, Twisted Metal is funny. It's really that game is of such an era,
Yeah,
it's even difficult to explain.
yeah,
The under 40s wouldn't get it, kind of. It's that thing. I think, yeah, the Toxic Commando trailer. They have a Bon Jovi cover in it. It's very on brand, and
mm,
that game's going to come down to if it's fun to play or not. And apparently, Carpenter plays a lot of video
he
games, so maybe he
does.
just,
Yeah, he's a big
And then,
fan of Dead Space in particular.
yeah, and then I really liked the first Alan Wake. I know a lot of people did, but it's really interesting to me because you watch the trailer, which looks interesting, and it's such a kind of it's obviously a callback to the first Alan Wake game, but I mean, all I can think of watching that trailer is control, control, control the
Yeah,
whole way through the
yeah.
trailer. So Alan Wake is super exciting.
And yeah, I
Yeah,
still want to cover Control for History Respawn. I don't know if I'll do it, but I wanted to get somebody who's maybe an architecture expert, 20th century architecture expert, to talk about brutalism and kind
yeah.
of looking at the brutalist structures in that game. And I don't know how you feel. I would love to go back and replay Control. I really enjoyed that game. I thought that was really a
I
nice
was just
experience.
I was thinking that the other day. I mean, I'd be excited to do that as well. And there's also a different slant, and maybe we wouldn't go near it for a few different reasons. But like, there's also the sense of the FBI and conspiracy theories and fears of
Yeah,
states and
yeah,
state power, and
you're right.
because Control is definitely doing that as well,
Yeah.
in ways that are interesting. And
Yes.
then, as I understand it, Alan Wake and Control are in the same fictional universe or
Yes, they
something
are.
like that.
Yes. Yeah.
And then in Alan Wake 2, in particular, it seems that they're hinting very strongly that you're effectively, because I think you're playing an FBI agent in that
Mm-hmm.
game, it seems, as
Mm-hmm.
part of it, and you're locked inside this narrative that Wake has created. So that's which was part of the first game, of course, but yeah, that's intriguing. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I really did not care for Alan Wake myself, the first one, but post Control, I feel like maybe Remedy has figured out some things that make me excited about this second Alan Wake game. So
yes,
and I love the world. I love the world building that they do. It's just kind of the game itself. Alan Wake 1, yeah, not a big fan, but I'm really interested to see Alan Wake 2.
yeah.
Okay, so that does it for the Summer Game Fest. Let's move on to our last show, which was the first show at the beginning of June, which is the PlayStation Showcase. And the PlayStation Showcase didn't have a very serious historical bent, although there was a couple games that caught our eye, including Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake, which debuted at the PlayStation Showcase, but will be on multiple platforms, PC and Xbox included. And Metal Gear Solid, famous Kojima series. Kojima is no longer, with
Hmm.
Konami, the publisher of this game. But this is a remake of Kojima's Metal Gear Solid 3, and this is the historical Metal Gear Solid game that is set in the Cold War. I think it's set in the late 1960s. And this is a game that I have been meaning to play for years and years and years and years, and I just never got around to it. And I guess now I'll just wait for the remake to come out. So, John, do you have any memories of Metal Gear Solid 3? Is this something you played back in the
No, it's
day?
I'm in exactly the same boat. I didn't play anything between Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 4. I
Mm-hmm.
missed 2 and 3 completely. So I'm actually quite excited about that collection. I've always felt, I don't know what to feel about the new Metal Gear game, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I never thought of myself as a Kojima fan at all. But I loved Death Stranding. And then, you start like, I find myself, I'm teaching Modern Japan this fall, and I find myself talking Metal Gear Solid, particularly Metal Gear Solid 4, which is old Solid Snake and everything, and he's just tired, and he's kind of ruminating on, oh crap, this war thing is going to happen no matter what I do. And so the Metal Gear Solid universe, where there's this corporate element to things, but Hideo Kojima is a Japanese man who grew up in a post-war Japan. Like that affects everything he's ever made.
Yeah.
So I would really look forward to playing two and three because are they both? Is it three is set in the Cold War or two and three are each? I can't remember. Three is the Cold War one, right?
Three is the Cold War one. Two, as
Yeah.
far as I know, that's the one that's set just after Metal Gear Solid. And so the only
Yeah.
Metal Gear game that I've played is actually Metal Gear Solid on the original PlayStation back
Hmm.
in 1995. And I have, watched videos, I've seen reviews, read reviews for the other Metal Gear games, but I've never played any of them. And I always meant to do a history respawn on Metal Gear Solid 5. Never did that. So,
Right.
maybe 3 will be the one that we finally get to it. Who knows? But
I
yeah,
know I know two is divisive because you actually play most of the game as a character that isn't Solid Snake.
famously, yeah.
Yeah. But three is interesting to me in this kind of Cold War kind of vibe to it. But yeah, the Metal Gear Solid series had a lot to say about global conflict that was clearly influenced by a guy who, for people probably know this, but it's in Japan's constitution. They're not allowed to have they don't permit themselves to have an army,
Yeah.
technically, which
We'll
is
see if that
shake your ground. Yeah.
yeah, we'll see if that continues going through the 21st century. I'm very curious.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
in the 70s when Kojima was a younger man, Japan is a place that, it's the only country and hopefully will forever be the only country that suffers a nuclear attack. It's a country that was 100% under this American security umbrella, yet, for example, the Vietnam War was enormously divisive within Japanese society.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things are referenced directly in his game, sometimes they're referenced obliquely. So I'm looking forward to playing those games for the first time.
Yeah, if we're
Be
taking,
fun.
fiction and fiction writing, genre writing as a whole, I mean, Hideo Kojima is arguably the most important Japanese author of the late 20th century, if you're thinking collectively, including
Yeah.
those games, and, kind of thinking at a meta level what he has to say about society. It's very interesting, maybe a little long winded, given some of the
Yeah.
cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid 4 in particular, but that's just the nature of the beast.
He's it's so funny because he's so indulgent and everyone's okay with it. And it's just, including me now. It used to bother me and I'm like, you be you,
You do
buddy. And
you,
it's just
yeah,
you do you. And
yeah.
it's just I don't know, it's good for him. Yeah.
And
Yes,
then
let's see.
lastly, at the PlayStation Showcase, we had an extended look at Spider-Man 2, which is just exciting because the other Spider-Man games are so great. Spider-Man 1 and then Miles Morales. And then lastly, now that PlayStation, Sony owns Bungie, we got to look at Bungie's new game, which is their oldest game, and it is a new version of Marathon. And Marathon, for you young listeners, Marathon was Bungie's first game, which debuted on Macintosh computers back in the mid 90s during the rush to create Doom clones, clones of Doom 1, Doom 2. Bungie, their first game was a Mac based first person shooter called Marathon, which I had the great pleasure to play on my mother's Apple computer back in 1995, 1996, and
It was Mac
really
only
enjoyed. It
at
was
first,
Mac
wasn't
only
it?
at first, yeah, and I
Yeah.
greatly enjoyed that game. I thought it was very good. And I could never understand why Bungie never went back to that, and instead they did all this Halo stuff. I just was not that interested initially in Halo. I was like, "Where's Marathon? Right? Let's get some more Marathon games." And now here it is. Marathon's back. 1995 is back, baby.
I'm telling you, I know I'm going to go very meta with this. Why not? Because Bungie are such an interesting company to me because Halo is just such a big part. Halo makes the Xbox viable in a lot of ways, and that makes Microsoft viable in the game space because they just weren't. Like they'd been trying and they had micropros, I guess, but it wasn't really a thing. And what strikes me, I think the trailer for Marathon is super exciting, but it's just interesting to me the visual language they're choosing to use, the audio choices they've made, the music and everything else. Yeah, like it's just I don't know, it's just intriguing to me that games have just the language of games has just changed so much.
Yeah,
Like if you go back to that first Marathon in this new trailer, it's like it's crazy. I mean, it's weird because when you and I were younger, Bob, video games were something that very few people older than us seemed to give any legitimacy to at all.
absolutely.
And lots of people liked video games, but in terms of like a cultural footprint, there wasn't that comfort level. of exploring what that meant and what games mean. And we're in such a different world now. Where
Yeah.
the marathon trailer, people should go and watch the trailer if you haven't seen it. It's just interesting to me. It's just like we're having a bit of fun and it's a little bit abstract and we're deliberately making color choices that are different, but we're hinting at a really deep story.
Yeah.
And I like Destiny. A lot of people don't like Destiny. I like Destiny too. I would be excited about them having a single player story heavy game. That would be very exciting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, that does it for the big tentpole press releases and shows. And now I'm just going to kind of run through quickly a bunch of other history games that were announced, not necessarily these past few weeks, but in the spring, basically, since we haven't been broadcasting History Respawn during our hiatus. So some of these games are old announcements, which you've probably heard of already, but we'll just kind of run through them here. First one is a game called Airborne Empire, which is a city builder that has got kind of a interwar period aesthetic, including sky pirates. Looks kind of fun. We have got Classified France 1944, which is a turn-based tactics game, which is set behind front lines in France, I believe. Oh, yeah, it is Classified France. I was right. Set behind front lines during the Second World War. We also have the debut trailer of the new Total War game, which is set in ancient Egypt, and it's called Total War Pharaoh. This is the follow-up from the team that developed Total War Troy. And what's interesting about this game, John, is that it is not mythical. So Total War Troy obviously included a lot of info and kind of godlike characters, demigods, and divine powers. And this game is going to be kind of hard history of ancient Egypt, of dynastic Egypt. And then we have next game, The Pirate Queen. A Forgotten Legend, and this is a puzzle adventure VR game that will star Lucy Liu as the famous 19th century Chinese pirate Cheng Shi. John, do you have any thoughts about this? Cheng Shi has been in the news a lot. A lot of YouTubers have picked up on her story. There's been a lot of podcast series about her, a lot of recent popular history books about her. We're in the midst of a Cheng Shi moment. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the Pirate Queen.
I typed Pirate Queen into YouTube to see the trailer, and Google's algorithms were like, "Oh, we know what you want." Like, "Oh no,
oh no,
here are some quote unquote Halloween outfits." Like,
oh
no. That's my next 2 weeks of my wife going, "What's that?" Like, oh no, but I'm joking. That did happen, I don't know. It's weird. Puzzle VR. There's lots of things we can put together there that I'm not sure they're going to go together. I mean, the historical figure is an interesting one. She was I don't know a huge amount about her. She was a very powerful person who ends up negotiating effectively, get back into the fold and everything. But she's turn of the 18th into the early 19th century pirate. And you mentioned earlier, is it Skull and Bones in the Indian Ocean?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
I mean, that's exciting too. I think a lot of games have been exploring what piracy is in the Caribbean, and it's not just hey ho, away we go, and all. Like there's interesting ideas about how these people are organizing and how to understand piracy's economic activity as well as the military activity and everything else. And that's certainly a thing in East Asia, particularly that time period. Like piracy is a big thing that the states in the area, that Japan, Korea, and China all had to deal with in some way and weren't always able to deal with. And so she's an example of that, of like they weren't able to do anything about her. They don't have a navy in that modern kind of a sense. So yeah, I'd be really intrigued. I don't know what a puzzle VR game is really. I sound so down. I shouldn't be. But I know it's exciting. It's an exciting choice, and you get Lucy Liu is a very recognizable name, and I suspect she'll do a fantastic job. And so, the trailer is so vague. They clearly haven't got a lot done on it yet.
Yeah, I think
fine.
we're far away from that, but
yeah, totally.
Worth
but
mentioning.
Yeah, very promising.
Yeah,
great choice. I mean, it's a great choice of topic. I think
Yeah.
it's just a great subject. So, yeah, fingers crossed. It's awesome.
Yeah. And then some other recent announcements include Nova Rome, which is a Rome city builder. And in this game, it looks very chill, but it also looks like it's got a lot of disasters related to city builders. If you played SimCity, I'm sure you're kind of familiar with that mechanic, that are related to the Roman gods and pleasing the Roman gods. And so That game kind of related to Summer Game Fest. There was some trailers for that, so I'd be interested to see where that goes. And then also we have a game called Ecumene Aztec, which is a survival RPG set during the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. And this game has got some interesting trailer moments, and it's got a very Assassin's Creed feel to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that looks really interesting. I mean, I think that like it's from what I can gather from the trailer, effectively the Spanish have kind of just got there or in the
Hmm.
process of course they were there and then they weren't there and they were hanging out for a long time and then they escalated, right? So
Yeah.
it seems like the escalation has just happened. That's a hell of a euphemism I just used, escalation, for what they do to the city of Tenochtitlan. So it looks like you're trying to kind of stay the course and keep your head afloat in this. So that's a super interesting premise. I'm intrigued to see what they do. I noticed that blood sacrifice is part of the leveling up mechanic,
Mm.
apparently. So I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, like
Mm.
let's see where we go with that.
Mm.
But again,
Yeah.
another, I mean, for God's sake, Bob, for years you and I have been saying just to respond. This idea that you can only cover certain topics or you shouldn't cover certain topics just because game players won't be interested. That's just that we said that we've been saying this BS for 15 years
Yeah.
and that's it now. It's not even controversial anymore. It's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, we're gonna do a pirate queen, the pirate queen from coastal China. We're doing a guy in Mexico City, what is now known as Mexico City, trying to survive European invasion.
Yeah.
These are cool stories. Let's do
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's awesome.
That's
That's awesome.
crazy. It's crazy, but it's awesome too. Another
Yeah.
example of that, kind of a historical narrative that is probably not familiar to most people, is in the new game Last Train Home, and this is a
Mm.
upcoming isometric battlefield strategy game that is going to be covering the story of the Czechoslovak Legion. The Czechoslovak Legion. This was a group of Czechoslovakian soldiers during the First World War who spent a lot of time fighting around the world, but then primarily in Russia, fighting with the forces of Tsarist Russia against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was, of course, at that time dominating, controlling, Czech and then Slovak territory. And so at the end of the First World War, as this group was fighting for the Entente powers, it got caught up in the Russian Civil War between the White Army and the Red Army, the Bolshevik Army. And then as the tide turned in the Russian Civil War, the Red Army, the Bolshevik began to, predominate. This Czechoslovak Legion had to escape Russia
Mm.
using the Trans-Siberian Railway, kind of a very famous part of Czech history, in particular, trying to get back to their home territories before they were murdered and destroyed by the Russian Red Army. And so this game is going to be exploring that history. And as far as what the developers have said so far, they are relying a lot on actual historical narrative, actual
Mm.
historical material. And this is another game that I'm sure is being supported by the Czech Republic's government, which has been a big supporter for putting historical narratives in games. A lot of what we've seen with Charles games and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
their recent games. And those games are supported by money
Mm-hmm.
from the Czech government, and so this is probably another example, at least maybe an early seed money. So that's really, really fascinating to get like this kind of smaller narrative, but then it's going to be perhaps a big game. We'll see.
Yeah. It looks great. Looks really exciting.
Yeah. And then also we have another interesting game called Sand. And this is developed by a group out of the Ukraine. They are actually Ukrainian game developers currently working in the Ukraine. And this is an open world survival game that is set in an alternate future in which the Austro-Hungarian Empire, we got the Austrian-Hungarians again, had
Mm-hmm.
discovered interplanetary travel in the eve of the First World War, kind of late 19th century. Again, going back late 19th century.
Yep. Yeah.
And it looks like a Dune with steampunk, so like a sandy off-world environment with steampunk engines and machines. And the developers in kind of pre-release interviews have talked about this being an exploration of industrial history before the Soviet occupation. So kind of thinking about this, territory, thinking about Ukraine in particular, before the advent of the Soviets in that territory. And so kind of interesting. There's a lot of kind of naked historical exploration going on in a game that is kind of an alternative future game. So fascinating. It looks crazy. And then
The teaser trailer
go
is
ahead.
really fun as well.
Yes.
I giggled like a little boy watching the teaser. It's like, this looks like fun.
Yeah.
It just looks fun.
It's worth watching for the opening look at that guy's pipe.
Yeah,
which is
that's
very,
right.
very late 19th century. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we had the news coming from 2K and Firaxis that a new Civilization game is in development, Civ 6, or Civ 7, I should say. Gosh, dating myself there. Old man moment. Apologies. Civ 7 is on the way, and this news came after the release by Firaxis of Marvel's Midnight Suns, which didn't quite hit the mark. I played it. I enjoyed it. Kind of scratched that XCOM itch. But recently, Firaxis has been hit by layoffs as a result of the poor performance of Marvel's Midnight Suns. So it sounds like the team that's still there is going to kind of get back to basics and build another Civilization game. So we'll see what happens with that.
I feel for him. Midnight Suns. I'm not sure why that game didn't do better. Honestly,
Me
I
too.
Don't get it.
I loved it.
Yeah,
I thought it was great.
Yeah,
highly recommend.
I need to play more of it, but it's great. And it's Marvel and it's fun, and I don't understand why that game didn't do better.
Yeah. And then just to wrap things up with history games, I just wanted to run down a list of recent history game releases. These are games that are already out that we have not had a chance to cover on History Respawn, but maybe we'll have a chance in the rest of the year to kind of take a look at some of these. And these games include Mask of the Rose from Fail Better Games, the developer of Sunless Seas, Sunless Skies, etc. Amnesia: The Bunker, which is a first-person horror game set in a World War I bunker that just came out on Xbox Game Pass. We had Company of Heroes 3, which is set during the Italian campaign of World War II. We had the very interesting look at World War II Rebuilder, which is kind of set in the mold of a power wash simulator in which you are rebuilding post-war Europe after the Second World War. I really want to take a look at that. We had the medieval illuminated manuscript game Inkle Nadi, which I've been dying to get a look at. We had Pharaoh: A New Era, which is a remake of the original Pharaoh game that came out, city builder game from, I think, 1997, 98, somewhere in there. My wife's favorite game of all time, Pharaoh. Valiant Hearts: Coming Home. This is the second Valiant Hearts game. That was a Netflix game, as John mentioned earlier with Into the Breach. This is Valiant Hearts Coming Home. This is a Netflix subscription game. We had The Light in the Darkness, which is a kind of long in development Holocaust game, which I haven't gotten to play yet. We had Major League Baseball, MLB The Show's 23 Storylines, which is including a Negro League mode. And so we had taken a look at the historical modes for MLB The Show, I think 21 a few years ago. And so now they've included, to celebrate the Negro Leagues in U.S. baseball history, we've got a new mode focused on them, and that game is available through Xbox Game Pass. So if you've got an Xbox, you can go and play that right now, and I hope to get to that this summer. And then lastly is The Great War, which is a World War I strategy game, and I think it's a grand strategy game that also includes small tactical battles as well. And so this game got a lot of press in, I think, the spring when it came out, and I haven't gotten a chance to look at it, but it kind of continues the story of what John was talking about, these historical narratives that we never thought we would see in games, including a World War I strategy game, is now here, right? And so every time we say this will never happen, it does. And it just shows you how diverse and how interesting and how much momentum there is behind historical games in general.
Yeah, it's crazy that there's more than, like, games in general are more than ever, but historical games, like, how would we even hope to keep up at this point anyway, even if we could,
I know. And 10 years ago when we started History Respawn, I had no problem covering each history game that came out. And now 10 years later, there's no way I can go into all these games. Like, if I was just doing it by myself, no hope whatsoever. And even with you, I mean, no hope
Yeah.
that we could get to all these games. It's outrageous.
This is something, and I hope I'm not sounding overly optimistic, but like going back to Clockwork Revolution earlier, and also Lamplighter's League and other games and stuff, there was definitely over the last 5 years or so, 5 to 10 years, there have been these phases of like conscious efforts to diversify the kind of stories we tell and everything. And I think that sometimes that can be clumsy, like anything can be. And now you see games, you don't even think twice about it. Like again, go back to when the first year's Respawn came into existence, Bob, and describe the lamp. If I came back in time and described the Lamplighter's League to you, you'd be like, John, what the fuck are you talking about? With all due respect, like that's what you would say.
Yeah,
And I would, nobody's blinking. Oh, that looks cool.
yeah,
I'll pay that.
yeah,
That's what the general reaction is.
yeah, definitely. So that does it for recent history game releases. That does it for upcoming history game releases, history game news. And so, as we always do with these episodes, we want to end with a brief discussion of what we've been playing recently. We'll make this super brief because I know John wants to get to lunch as quickly as possible. He's looking a little peckish on the Zoom video. So, John, briefly, what have you been playing recently, and why is it Diablo 4?
Well, just before Diablo 4 came into my life, I was playing American Truck Simulator.
Mm.
And I was driving down to Austin from California, and it is the nerdiest thing you can do, and I love it. And it's fantastic, and I recommend it. But I've been playing an absolute ton of Diablo 4. This is the first Diablo game that's ever really got me,
Mm.
and it's also the first. I've played a bunch of 3 and 2, but I played both of those after that initial. This is the first game like me and the rest of the world playing Diablo 4, and I'm like, this is great. All I'm really doing is clicking, right clicking, and pressing 1, 2, 3, or 4, and I couldn't be having more fun. Uh, Bob, what do you think of Diablo 4?
I have been playing a lot of Diablo 4 as well. And in addition to playing on my own, I've got a level 21 druid named Buford. And you can create a title for your character. This is something that other players can see. And so I think I picked the title of Loud Lout or something like that. I can't remember. But in addition to playing by myself, I had my first co-op experience with my Wednesday night crew. This is me and 3 other players. So we had a 4-person party, and we played for a couple hours last night. And boy, the game is great on its own, but playing with other people, you really see the potential immediately.
Oh, wow.
You get to see kind of the scaling that the game does so well. And we had players who had just started the game, but then some who were even further than I was. We had a level 43 character, I think. Our rogue was level 43. And so the game does a tremendous job of scaling to all of those skill sets and play types and making for a really, really enjoyable experience. And now I'm afraid to say that playing co-op with a group of 4 has kind of ruined solo Diablo 4 for
Oh
me, because
no.
it's like,
Oh no.
this is so much more fun, and the game itself is great on its own, but playing with another player is just adds to the joy. And you get to see, because as a player you want to focus on your skill sets, your player character skill sets. So I'm doing druid stuff, I'm turning into a werewolf, I've got wolf companions, I've got raven companions. It all looks great, but then getting to play with other people, it's like, oh, I get to see all the skills of a necromancer and a rogue, and a rogue's getting in there and they were getting all stabby, and then you get to watch like the barbarian doing its spinning whirlwind, and it's like, oh, that looks fun. And it just makes you excited to play with other players, but then you're also kind of like, oh, I should make another player where I could be a barbarian, or I could be a necromancer. So it was really a lot of fun. And surprisingly, we were playing the 4 members of our group. I was playing PC. We had 2 people on Xbox and then 1 person on PlayStation. And Blizzard's networking, incredible, the kind of the standard bearer, was able to support that cross-platform play as well as support voice chat, which was perfect. We had no problems with voice chat whatsoever. And it's so, in terms of the game and the experience, it's fantastic. But in terms of just kind of the technical marvel of that networking and that netcode, it is amazing. So highly recommend Diablo 4.
Well, this sounds like, you know, I'll play a game like this and it'll talk about the post game content or end game, dungeons, yada yada, season pass. I'm like, oh sure, whatever. And already I'm thinking I'm going to do all of that. I'm going
Yeah.
to do all of that. I could be playing this game for years already. I think that,
Yeah.
and it's just fascinating because Blizzard, man, or I guess you should call them Activision Blizzard, have not been on the best run.
No.
And Overwatch 2 is an effing car crash.
Mm-hmm.
Like what a disaster, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's an enjoyable game and everything, but what the hell? Like just it's a mess. And so
Yeah.
Diablo 4, I was pleasantly surprised with like, oh, this feels like the game. It used to be that every game Blizzard made was like this.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is the best game.
Yeah.
Like this is the best game available. Like every
Yeah.
game they made was like that for like 10, 15 years. So I'm very pleased Diablo 4. And I mean I haven't played a co-op yet, so I'm pleased to hear it's that much fun. Now I'm scared though. Maybe I'll finish the campaign on my own
John,
first and then I
come play with
co-op.
us. We're
Yeah, I should.
missing one of our party members next week. So Wednesday night, you want to
Let's do
hop
it.
on? Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can. I'm a druid too. I like how when you pick your character, the druid is like you could be a swarthy male or a swarthy female, but you will be swarthy. Diablo 4 has made the decision. Druids look like they hold the bar up at 1 a.m. That's what our druids
Druids
are.
hold the bar up at 1 a.m. They hold the bar up at 3 a.m. They hold the bar up at 5 a.m. And they never take showers. I mean,
That's right. It's
uh,
very much their aesthetic in this game for some reason.
yeah.
Uh,
And then lastly, we took a long family trip recently, and during that trip, I decided not to take the Steam Deck, but instead I took my Nintendo Switch so that I could play Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which is the follow-up to Breath of the Wild, which for many people is the best game ever made. But I'm here to tell you that Tears of the Kingdom is much, much better than Breath of the Wilds, and I just finished it this week. Took a morning to do it, couple hours, but I defeated the final boss, and it is very, very satisfying. So if you enjoy Nintendo games, if you enjoy Zelda, I highly, highly recommend playing Tears of the Kingdom, which I think it might be my favorite Zelda game of all time. It's been a long time since I went back to Ocarina of Time, but I think it might be the best one.
wow.
We'll see. I'm not sure. And John, you haven't started it. You haven't played it yet, right?
I haven't played it yet. I wish they would take away the weapon durability thing, although I hear that's less of an issue with
It's
this new one.
very much less of an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need them to develop the pharmaceutical that you can take safely that eliminates sleep. That's what I need because I need to play that game, but maybe it'll be Christmas or something. That's kind of where I am.
Yeah, I hear you.
You know.
I hear you. And,
Yeah.
it was tough for me because Diablo 4 came out and I stopped playing
Hmm.
Tears of the Kingdom for a week and a half. And then I was like, if I keep playing Diablo 4, I might not
Right.
finish Tears. And I was right at the end. And so I just like, okay, this week I was like, okay, I'm going to buckle down. I'm going to stop playing Diablo 4. I'm going to finish this. And then it's going to be Summer of Diablo, which it is
Yeah.
right now. It started last night. It's going to keep going. It's going to go all year, I think. So
I'm enjoying the evergreen social media meme of like what is it? You have the house to yourself, a bottle of Mountain Dew, Diablo on the computer. The year is 2023. You were 41 years old.
yeah,
It's just so yes, that's correct.
that's me in a nutshell. So listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the show. Again, we should be back with more regular content the rest of the year. I can't say that we'll do more than an episode a month, but I think we can probably at least put out a podcast each month, kind of talking about some of the history games that we've looked at, and hopefully getting back to bringing on guests and talking more in depth
Yeah.
about each of these games that we've looked at. But if you're interested in more about our show, you can travel to historyrespawned.com, which has got our archive and will include all of our new episodes. We are also still on Patreon, so if you really enjoy our work and want to support us in some way, particularly support the podcast, which costs money, unfortunately, please go to patreon.com/historyrespawned. And I'm going to be in the midst of kind of figuring out some new rewards for Patreon and see if I can't get something compelling going. It's always tough, with us both being academics, both being parents, tough to fit in this stuff to our schedule. But I think for me at least, it's really rewarding, and I hope you feel the same, John. And so
I
that's
do.
where
Very
you can
much
find
so.
us. Yeah, historyrespawn.com, and then Patreon as well. And I don't know how much we'll be doing Twitter in the future. I need to find a new way to publicize this show. We'll see if I can figure
Yeah.
something out. But Twitter seems kind of dead in general. But that's it. So thank you very much, listeners. John, leave us with some lasting thoughts. Any thoughts? Any last ideas?
I had a ton of fun. Pick Druid. That's what I'm going to say.
That's it. Okay. Listener, thank you so much. And until next time, goodbye.